Hello, and welcome to Geonetric's August webinar. While we're waiting for a few people who are still in the process of joining us, I'll go over our usual housekeeping items. Today's webinar is brought to you by Geonetric. Now, we're a marketing agency and technology partner that helps healthcare organizations around the country generate marketing results. We offer a full suite of services, including website design and development, marketing campaigns, SEO, content development, and a whole lot more. Of course, you can learn all about all the things we do at our website, geonetric.com. To go along with today's webinar, we've developed a checklist to help you prioritize page experience fixes for your site. You can download it at geonetric.com/CWV for Core Web Vitals, CWV. Our webinar today will run about an hour. If you're listening on a speakerphone, we recommend you mute your line to prevent audio quality issues. We'll answer questions through the presentation. We're going to have a little different format today. So please, as questions occur to you, we encourage you to enter them in the questions box. We depend on your feedback to make our webinars the best that they can be. So we hope you'll take a moment to complete the survey at the end of the webinar. And of course, a recording of this presentation will be posted on geonetric.com in the Ideas section. I am Ben Dillon. I'll be your host for today, and joining me is Kelly Collins, Senior Digital Marketing Strategist here at Geonetric. Now, Kelly's well-versed in SEO, display advertising, social media, and analytics. She manages digital marketing projects for health systems, always with an eye for creating tailored strategies that align with each organization's goals. Prior to joining Geonetric, Kelly managed digital and traditional marketing for both nonprofits and small businesses, honing her skills for developing effective campaigns and spending ad dollars wisely. Kelly graduated from the University of St. Thomas with a degree in communication and journalism, with an emphasis in advertising and graphic design. She's also certified in the Google Webmaster Suite. Now, Kelly's going to give us an overview of Core Web Vitals today, and then we're going to have kind of a conversational discussion. And so again, I hope you'll enter questions as they occur to you. We'll work that into that conversation. So with that, take it away, Kelly.
Thank you, Ben. So first, let's talk about what exactly is covered in this new change to Google's search algorithm, the page experience update, which also falls along with the Core Web Vitals, which is what we're talking about today. In short, the page experience update is designed to prioritize web pages based on user experience. The easier it is for users to find or accomplish what they need, the better your page will in turn rank. So the page experience update is a collection of many user experience factors, but much of the focus and discussion has been placed on the Core Web Vitals. So while there are many different Web Vitals out there, there are three primary metrics that Google is currently focused on that they just began rolling out officially in June and is expected to complete its rollout by the end of this month. The page experience update is about a lot more than just the Core Web Vitals, but most of these things are old news, so to speak. So these items are being re-emphasized by Google in the update, and those include the mobile-friendly signal. So your website should be mobile-friendly. We've known this for years. If your site isn't mobile-friendly quite yet, then that's probably what you should prioritize before focusing on these Core Web Vitals. Safe browsing is another important signal for page experience. You shouldn't have any malicious code on your website. HTTPS means your website should be served over HTTPS to provide a more secure experience for users. And no intrusive interstitials, which means the content on your web page should be easy to see and interact with. There shouldn't be a bunch of non-essential pop-ups blocking important information. So all of these, along with the Core Web Vitals at the top there, provide unified guidance for quality signals that are essential to delivering a great user experience. And these Core Web Vitals will now be included in that update, and they really focus on loading, interactivity, and visual stability. We'll dive in a little more into what all those mean. This is a definition taken from Google on how they explain core web vitals. So core web vitals measure dimension of web usability such as load time, interactivity, and the stability of content. So those are the three main scoring factors that indicate that Google is understanding the user experience of a web page and being able to now quantify that user experience. So a brief overview of those three core web vitals. The first one is largest contentful paint, or LCP, and that is the page load speed for the user, essentially the time it takes for the largest element on a page to load. Next is first input delay, FID, measures how quickly a page responds to a user's input. So this input can include clicking on navigation links or pressing keys to enter something into the search field, or tapping on an image that may redirect to another landing page, or even opening up a drop-down menu on a mobile device. And then the third one is cumulative layout shift, which measures the visual stability of landing page elements during the page load. In other words, CLS measures how much videos, images, links, etc. may shift or jump during the loading process. So optimizing for this core web vital can help prevent users from making accidental clicks as the page is loading if content is shifting, or getting frustrated because they may accidentally click on something and they're taken to another page than the one they intended to see. So visual stability enhances the user experience and overall improves your SEO performance. One big question is, how do you know if your site passes these core web vitals? There's a few different tools to test your site. And along with that, there are two types of data that will kind of help you understand which tools to use and what that will mean for your metrics. So the first set up here are the field tools, and the field data is collected from your real users on your website, each with their unique device and network connection through any of these reports. It may not be available for all of your pages if they aren't getting enough visitors, but this is a good way to see how your actual users are experiencing your website and what's impacting them. The lab data is not collected from your real users. It's simulated data collected within a controlled environment with a predefined device and a 3G network connection setting. So this doesn't include that user interaction, but the lab data is simulated, so it's kind of Google's way of testing that page with their controlled environment. So it's important to know that both of these data types and tools exist, because you may be getting great scores in Lighthouse on that lab data, for example, and maybe you're high-fiving yourself for that. But if your actual users are having a poor experience in that field data, then you'll want to make sure that you're looking at that as well. Or alternatively, you can have the same in reverse, great scores based on your field data, but when Google is running those pages, you may have poor scores there. So these are all great tools to look at. You can run a page speed insights report. This is one of the fastest and easiest ways, I think, to get started to test individual pages on your website or even your competitor's website. You can run any page in there, and it'll show you the current page speed score for mobile and desktop, as well as how you fare against the core web vitals, provided that there's enough data. And then Google Search Console is another one that will be helpful to see how your real users are experiencing those pages. So you can access the Core Vitals report in Google Search Console, and this will show you how those pages are performing at the page level, as long as you have enough traffic going to those pages. And if you click into that, you'll be able to decipher by mobile and desktop how those pages are performing based on those scores. So they'll call out which core web vitals you might be passing and which ones you are failing today, which will help you give you a bit of a roadmap for the changes you should be making now or could be focusing on. And one thing to note with the field data is they are collected on a fixed 28-day collection period. So if you are making changes to improve your core web vitals today, you're not going to see immediate results until the next 28-day collection period is complete. So that is just important to keep in mind for optimizing. It can make it a little more long-term to keep an eye on that, but you won't be seeing the results the next day. You'll want to wait for that next period. So with all of this, what does it actually mean for SEO? There's a few top of mind things I wanted to call out because this has been such a big topic across the board for the last year and a half. The one thing we like to stress is don't panic. This is a big update and it's being talked about a lot, but this is one algorithm update out of thousands and thousands that Google performs. And looking at 3 ranking signals that Google is telling us about compared to all the other signals that your website is weighted and ranked on. So that said, search engine optimization hasn't changed drastically because of this. And if you're not passing these core web vitals today, that's okay. Most sites aren't, but it's a great pathway to kind of see where Google is moving towards and start to iterate and optimize your site for those metrics. You want to continue to optimize holistically for SEO. So while these metrics, again, are important, they are one of many signals that are used to rank your pages. So we always want to keep in mind that intent of the search query that someone is typing in is still a very strong signal. So a page that might have a subpar page experience, it could still rank highly if it has great relevant content and is answering those users' questions. We've seen this with other big updates too, like the mobile friendly or the HTTPS. The ranking boost is likely going to be small. In previous cases, it was nothing more than a tiebreaker to see how pages are ranking. Again, keeping in mind all the other ranking signals that we want to focus on. So in other words, if all other things are equal, then passing core web vitals might give you the edge over your competition. But at the end of the day, we want to continue to optimize holistically for SEO and remember that content is still king. So Google has made it clear that relevant content is still the most important ranking factor out there. Poor content won't suddenly start outranking other sites because of their core web vitals. So ultimately, Google is looking at their search results that they deliver. And if you search for something and land on a website with a terrible user experience, then it is essentially Google's fault for pointing you to that website in the first place. So Google's really trying to make it so every search that is conducted is successful for the user, whether you click on a listing or an ad, but they are trying to guide that user to the most relevant and valuable content. That being said, Google would much rather you land on a highly relevant page with a poor user experience than a great web page with that lower relevance to your search. So once again, content is more important than speed, but we still do want to keep in mind these metrics as well. You can take it from Google also. This is a quote from them: "A good page experience doesn't override having great relevant content." So where to begin? With all this information and all these metrics, looking at your pages, we do have a checklist available that Ben mentioned, and we'll walk through some of the top 3 places that you can begin to look at and start assessing your site. So after you run your site or pages, you look in Google Search Console and you see what pages are being affected or how they're being scored. You first want to prioritize those high traffic pages. So if analyzing and improving your entire site seems daunting, which it certainly can be, a good place to start is to determine what pages on your site receive the most organic traffic or are important to rank in order to meet your business goals, and then prioritize from there. And then you also want to focus on what device your users are coming from for these pages. So because we know mobile and desktop can have different scores and experiences for users. So first start by prioritizing those high traffic pages based on the device that people are visiting those the most. Another thing to look at is your site's technical debt. So as soon as a website is created, you can start to amass what we like to call technical debt, which means you may be adding third-party scripts over time or additional code here and there as you're making updates or changes to your website. And as this continues to pile on as your site gets older, if you're not regularly going in and cleaning it up, that's where the debt comes in. So you want your site to be as lean or debt-free as possible in order to keep that page load efficient. Some things you can look into here are removing any non-critical third-party scripts. So those third-party scripts or plugins that you might have added way back when or just no longer need, those can slow down your page. So check for things that you're no longer using and either remove or replace those. And then you can also simplify your CSS by eliminating unnecessary codes, and that will help reduce the file size and speed up your render time. Essentially, you just want to be diligent and audit regularly your site to see if you still need that code or script on there, or if you could get rid of it. And it's also worth mentioning that with ditching some technical debt from your site, you'll likely be improving the overall accessibility of your site and page experience, making it more inclusive and user-friendly. And images are one of the biggest culprits for that page load speed or shifting during the loading process. So if you're running a page through one of those tools, you'll likely see that an image might be what's at the top for biggest opportunity to focus on. So that's a great place to start as well, ensuring that your images are responsive, that they're showing correctly on all devices. You can define the height and the width of images to prevent that layout shift. So that will tell the user's browsers exactly how much space each element should take up on that page, which can prevent it from changing as the page fully loads. Converting your images into optimal formats, next-gen formats such as JPEG 2000 and JPEG XP can often provide better compression than just JPEGs. So, and another one is to check image accessibility and add missing alt text. Along with page experience improvements, you want to make sure that your images are also accessible. This can help users reading screen readers, as well as assist search engines in defining what an image is about.
Fantastic. Thank you, Kelly. It's a great overview. I know I have a bunch of questions, and I'm sure our audience does as well. For those of you in the audience, please submit your questions in the GoToWebinar questions box. I'll work those into our conversation. We've already got a couple, as well as some things that I'm itching to ask. So I guess we'll dive right in. I guess sort of starting at the top, like Google's making changes all the time, right? And they are well known for making changes without talking about them publicly, without necessarily always being particularly transparent about those changes. And this one feels different than a lot of that. And I'm wondering, has that positioning from them changed, or is there a reason why they are talking about this one so publicly?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a shift in how Google, I believe, is trying to be more transparent in their updates. So they're still not going to let us know every single update because they do so many, but the ones that are going to impact and really benefit the user, I think that's what they're really focusing on. They've been clear that all the stakeholders for a website, whether that's designers, SEO, developers, anyone who impacts websites should have the users and user experience as their key focus. And they've gotten better at measuring that user experience as well. So I think there's also that transparency with their bigger updates or shifts in search rankings. Core Web Vitals are an important step forward in helping us all understand how to improve that user experience rather than kind of guessing over time, but Google has laid out these guidelines. So not only will they help improve and maintain great user experiences today, but they'll also keep us all informed about their expectations and how things continue to shift over time.
That makes sense. That makes sense. You talked about sort of the what. You talked about what Core Web Vitals are and a bit of why. I'm wondering a bit about the when, right? So is this rolled out? Are we seeing the impact on the organic search landscape for healthcare yet, or is a lot of this still kind of making its way into the algorithms?
Yes, so it's been a slow rollout. Google announced this over a year ago, and they've delayed that rollout a few times with COVID, understandably. They've had iterations of clarifications and some, pushing back their deadlines. But it did officially start rolling out in June, a couple of months ago, and is expected to completely roll out by the end of this month. So they don't want to completely shake things up. I think that's the don't panic of it all. But they do want to drive this iterative improvement because they know that users' expectations are changing overall. And they have this quote that I really like. You can think of it as if you're adding a flavoring to a food that you've been preparing, rather than adding that flavor all at once into the mix. They've slowly been sprinkling this in and rolling it out slowly so that they can catch any fixes or fix any bugs or catch any errors with that. So we haven't seen any drastic increases or decreases in healthcare sites. I don't expect that we would, unlike we do for some other algorithm updates where we can, very specifically point to a month where rankings either increased or decreased based on some changes that Google made, but it'll be a gradual change as sites begin to or continue to improve that user experience.
Gotcha. So just because my site performs well today, that doesn't mean I'm completely out of the woods, but we're not anticipating seeing a lot of really dramatic shifts as a result of this.
Yes. Unfortunately, yes, you're not out of the woods yet because like all SEO, it's never a one and done. So your site may be performing well today, but as everyone kind of works on these improvements or optimizations, the sooner you start making those improvements to your own website, I think the greater your advantage will be to your competitors. So definitely recommend being more proactive with these UX improvements rather than reactive based on what you're seeing 3 months from now.
Gotcha. So how is sort of the average website out there doing on these metrics today?
It's very common that not many websites are even passing all three of these metrics. I think the last stat I saw was only 3 to 10% are passing all of these. So if you're running this test and seeing that you're not passing, it's okay. I think we saw that Google sites aren't even all passing. So there's no gold star or perfect formula quite yet. It's more of those guidelines or benchmarks that Google's giving us to work towards that better user experience.
Gotcha. And is this sort of are these straight pass fail kind of metrics, or is it all sliding scale?
There's been some mixed messages from Google on that, but so there are scales, as we saw in that Search Console report. There's the good, poor, the green, red, and yellow. But Google backtracked on their messaging a little bit in May when they said that it is no longer a pass fail. So initially it was believed that these Core Web Vitals were all or nothing, that you would have to pass all of them in order to get the ranking boost. However, now it's believed that you could get a ranking boost by passing just one of those Core Web Vital metrics. So it's a little unclear, but there is a scale that will show you, you know, you're maybe close to it, and it will give you those really helpful things to look at to kind of get over that hump of getting into that good range.
Gotcha. Now, I think you were trying to give us a bit of a hierarchy here, right? You told us content is still king. I'm wondering how big a factor do we expect these page experience metrics, particularly these core web vitals, to be compared to those traditional SEO focus areas, right? Content or technical SEO elements or things like that.
I think the best way to think about it is that these are still, and I don't want to diminish the importance of them, but they are a bit of a tiebreaker for those ranking signals. So, that content, that relevance to the user's search query is still the most important. And if, say, you have the exact same type of content as your competitor and your page, is HTTPS, then your site's going to rank above them. And if you have the same, you're both mobile friendly, you both have HTTPS, but your core web vitals is a little better than theirs, then you could outrank them that way. So it still does all boil down to those important keywords, organic content, but the user experience and the page experience has always played a factor. It's just more of a score that we can actually see now.
And that makes sense. And you talked already about the fact that there are pages that are probably more worth your time and effort and pages that are less worth your time and effort. I'm wondering also, is this something that we just look at in a vacuum? We just look at how our score looks and how we're improving over time? Or is this a competitive thing? Do we look at the pages maybe we're competing with most often from an SEO perspective and look at how they're doing on these metrics and how we're doing on these metrics and use that as maybe a prioritization or a focus metric?
Yeah, at the end of the day, what really matters is whether or not you're doing better than your competitor. So as much as we want to strive for, that perfect user experience, if your site is maybe ranking 4th or 5th on the page, but your competitors are ranking 1 and 2, then there are certain things to look at. And again, we don't want to only focus on these core web vitals, but it is a way to, as you're looking at, the keywords and everything else, the core web vitals is that other channel that you can look at to hopefully outrank that competitor. So again, you don't necessarily need a perfect score, but as long as you are doing better than your competitors, that's what we're really focused on.
Gotcha. And ultimately, is this something that's going to apply to SEO on kind of a page-by-page basis, or is it aggregated together and apply for our whole site?
They are page level metrics. So if your home page is failing, so to speak, but your service line pages are passing for the majority, then your service line pages or page may be eligible for that ranking boost. So it is a page by page with a little asterisk for the cumulative layout shift, since that is a cumulative score. It'll be continuously measured as the user is going from page to page. So for the most part, they are page by page, but there is still a little bit of it that looks at the user experience site-wide.
Gotcha. And how often do we anticipate these scores shifting? Like, is this something that's going to be changing constantly or not that often?
I would say they shouldn't be changing very often unless you're making a lot of changes to those pages. Whether you're trying to improve your score and making those optimizations, or if you're making changes and not paying attention to those things that impact those core web vitals, then it could, decrease. But in theory, they really shouldn't be changing unless, you're making changes intentionally for those pages or taking care of some of that technical debt from a site-wide perspective.
Gotcha. we have some questions about image formats. You mentioned some newer image formats. Do you have any recommendations on what image formats organizations or the folks on the call should be thinking about and maybe moving towards in order to maybe get an edge with these metrics?
Yep, I think the ones that are recommended are JPEG 3000. I don't want to butcher any of these. The JPEG XP and web performance image format. So those have been defined as the next generation formats. So those can just help with the compression on your site. So if there is a way to change the format of your images, then that's a good place to start.
Gotcha. Now, you talked a little bit about interstitials as a bad piece of the experience. I know a lot of our sites have been adding some of these banners for cookies and things like that. Are those a problem, or is Google kind of overlooking those as a necessary evil given everything going on from a privacy perspective today?
Yeah, I think where those come in is if they're unnecessary pop-ups coming to the user, or if they're ads being shown to the user. So there are definitely the necessary or the helpful ones for the user, and Google can recognize that if users are able to clearly X out of that pop-up, or it's not obstructing their entire page experience. Those are okay, but it's the ones that you might see on an e-commerce site, or the ones that the ads just are, the X is very hard to find, and those ones lead to a poor user experience.
Gotcha. You talked also a bit about content shifts, and I know that this is one that has some folks concerned. If you've got a very jQuery heavy kind of front end implementation, like does that have the potential to hurt your ranking as far as these things go if you are getting some of that moving around? How much moving around is really a problem, I think is what they're trying to ask here.
I would recommend running that page through one of those tools, and that'll kind of show you. But if you're going to that page and you can see that things are shifting, that's probably too much. If Google can see the minor shifts that might not be as apparent to the human eye, but if you're going to a page and kind of put yourself in the shoes of the user, if you're trying to click on something right away and then things move down, that's probably too much.
Gotcha. There's some fairly specific questions here about different strategies for performance, but one that I guess I'll put out there is, like, do you feel like it's worthwhile to start looking at things like content delivery networks or CDNs that are geographically closer to individual clients, individual end users? Those sorts of things, that those milliseconds that you're gaining, is that enough of a benefit to really start looking at those strategies more seriously?
I haven't heard much about those being, part of these metrics. So I don't want to say no, but I don't think that should be the main focus of this. I think there's other things that Google is telling us that do matter or that we can focus on. So I would definitely focus on those things first, and yeah, and then kind of go from there. And if that is something that is the next thing to try, then it could be worth trying.
Yeah, most sites have bigger fish to fry at this point.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah, okay. So certainly on different devices, people get very different experiences, and we tend to break it down to mobile versus desktop. I think you could break it down in more ways than that. But even if we just look at mobile and desktop, and it seems like Google often looks at those two things with a little bit of light between them. But if is Google looking at both of those things together? Is it looking mostly at what your mobile experience looks like when someone's approaching it from a mobile perspective and desktop when it's a desktop? Is there one that we need to focus on more than the other?
Yeah, so Google is looking at both, and they're, for the most part, separating those scores out by mobile performance versus desktop performance. And it is common to see your desktop scores being a little better than your mobile scores, just because someone on a desktop device probably has a better hardware or a faster, more reliable internet connection. So it's common to see that mobile score a little lower or having more opportunities there to work on. But yeah, I think from overall, there's in that Google Search Console report, for example, they'll break it up by mobile and desktop. And some of those pages may be completely fine on, like I said, desktop, but they're not passing on the mobile. So you definitely want to take it on a page by page and also device by device basis.
Yeah. We got a question as well, sort of in a similar vein, about AMP pages, and where do those fit into this discussion, or again, is it a little too niche and probably not something that makes its way to the top of the list of things that you need to start working on?
It's a good question. So the accelerated mobile pages, or AMP, I feel like a few years ago were all the rage, where they were designed to provide that faster load time by kind of stripping out some elements that would reduce that load speed. And that is helpful, but you kind of lead yourself to that doesn't always provide the best user experience. So the AMP pages are either pass or fail, whereas the Core Web Vitals, like I mentioned, is kind of has that more gradient scale or score of that range. So AMP itself also is not a ranking factor for pages, whereas Core Web Vitals are. So along the same vein, as there are probably bigger fish to fry, but that these pages are part of the conversation with Core Web Vitals. So if you do have those AMP validated pages, then they're probably passing those Core Web Vital scores. They're probably doing well, but again, they can have their drawbacks with that user experience. So I guess they are part of the conversation, but I would, if you do have those now, then still test them. But if you don't, I would, again, still probably focus first and foremost on these Core Web Vitals and optimizing for those.
Well, and it still seems like AMP is something I mostly bump into in like news feed, readers and things like that. It's yeah, I'm not sure how many of the pages that people experience are actually going to use those formats if they're available.
Right.
So I guess the last thing here is what's the future outlook here, right? Is this the end of the story in terms of what Google's giving us for this, or do we kind of expect this to be a starting point and they're gonna be growing what they're looking at from a experience perspective over time?
Yeah, I think this is probably just the beginning of this whole shift in that user focus, user experience. As I mentioned, the Web Vitals already existed as part of that page experience, but Google came out and said these three are the core Web Vitals. So I don't know that they'll add more to those core Web Vitals, but more Web Vitals in general could definitely come out. I think the immediate benefit will be a better experience for users overall. And in the long term, I think it'll just be helpful that we're working towards a shared set of user experience metrics and thresholds across all websites. So it's more of that transparency, and being able to quantify that user experience should help all websites and all users. So that'll be, I think, really critical for the whole web and search ecosystem moving forward.
Well, fantastic. Well, thank you for all those insights. And thanks to everyone for joining us today. We do have, just as a reminder, a sort of companion piece that goes along with today's webinar. It's a white paper that recaps some of what we discussed here and gives a checklist of page experience fixes to work through. And oh, we have oh no, that's right. Okay, and you can get that at genetric.com/CWV. CWV. And thank you for attending today's webinar, and we will hopefully see you again in September.
Thank you.